Chapter 11. Leo. The gold wings were overkill. Leo could dig the chariot and the two white horses. He was okay with Nike's glittering sleeveless dress. Calypso totally rocked that style, but that wasn't relevant. And Nike's piled up braids of dark hair circled with a gilded laurel wreath. Her expression was wide-eyed and a little crazy, like she'd just had 20 espressos and ridden a roller coaster, but that didn't bother Leo. He could even deal with the gold-tipped spear pointed at his chest. But those wings? They were polished gold, right down to the last feather. Leo could admire the intricate workmanship, but it was too much, too bright, too flashy. If her wings had been solar panels, Nike would have produced enough energy to power Miami. "Lady," he said, "could you fold your flappers, please? You're giving me a sunburn." "What?" Nike's head jerked towards him like a startled chicken's. "Oh, my brilliant plumage. Very well, I suppose you can't die in glory if you're blinded and burned." She tucked in her wings. The temperature dropped to a normal 120-degree summer afternoon. Leo glanced at his friends. Frank stood very still, sizing up the goddess. His backpack hadn't yet morphed into a bow and quiver, which was probably prudent. He couldn't have been too freaked out, because he'd avoided turning into a giant goldfish. Hazel was having trouble with Riordan. The roan stallion nickered and bucked, avoiding eye contact with the white horses pulling Nike's chariot. As for Percy, he held his magic ballpoint pen, like he was trying to decide whether to bust out some sword moves or autograph Nike's chariot. Nobody stepped forward to talk. Leo kind of missed having Piper and Annabeth with them. They were good at the whole talking thing. He decided somebody had better say something before they all died in glory. "So," he pointed his index fingers at Nike. "I didn't get the briefing, and I'm pretty sure the information wasn't covered in Frank's pamphlet. Could you tell me what's going on here?" Nike's wide-eye stare unnerved him. Was Leo's nose on fire? That happened sometimes when he got stressed. "We must have victory!" the goddess shrieked. "The contest must be decided. You have come here to determine the winner, yes?" Frank cleared his throat. "Are you like Nike or Victoria?" "Ah!" The goddess clutched the side of her head. Her horses reared, causing Riordan to do the same. The goddess shuddered and split into two separate images, which reminded Leo, ridiculously, of when he used to lie on the floor in his apartment as a kid and play with the coiled doorstep on the skirting board. He would pull it back and let it fly. Sproing. The stopper would shudder back and forth, so fast it looked like it was splitting into two separate coils. That's what Nike looked like, a divine doorstop, splitting in two. On the left was the first version, glittery sleeveless dress, dark hair circled with laurels, golden wings folded behind her. On the right was a different version, dressed for war in a Roman breastplate and greaves. Short auburn hair peeked out from the rim of a tall helmet. Her wings were feathery white, her dress purple, and the shaft of her spear was fixed with a plate-sized Roman insignia, a golden SPQR in a laurel wreath. "I am Nike," cried the image on the left. "I am Victoria," cried the one on the right. For the first time, Leo understood the whole saying his abuelo used to use, talking out of the side of your mouth. This goddess was literally saying two different things at once. She kept shuddering and splitting, making Leo dizzy. He was tempted to get out his tools and adjust the idle on her carburetor, because that much vibration would make her engine fly apart. "I am the decider of victory," Nike screamed. "Once I stood here at the corner of Zeus's temple, venerated by all. I oversaw the games of Olympia. Offerings from every city-state were piled at my feet." "Games are irrelevant," yelled Victoria. "I am the goddess of success in battle. Roman generals worship me. Augustus himself erected my altar in the Senate house." "Ah!" Both voices screamed in agony. "We must decide. We must have a victory." Riordan bucked so violently that Hazel had to slide off his back to avoid getting thrown. Before she could calm him down, the horse disappeared, leaving a vapour trail through the ruins. "Nike," Hazel said, stepping forward slowly. "You're confused, like all the gods. The Greeks and the Romans are on the verge of war. It's causing your two aspects to clash." "I know that." The goddess shook her spear, the tip rubber banding into 2 points. "I cannot abide unresolved conflict. Who is stronger? Who is the winner?" "Lady, nobody's the winner," Leo said. "If that war happens, everybody loses." "No winner?" Nike looked so shocked. Leo was pretty sure his nose must be on fire. "There is always a winner. One winner. Everyone else is a loser. Otherwise victory is meaningless. I suppose you want me to give certificates to all the contestants. Little plastic trophies to every single athlete or soldier for participation. Should we all line up and shake hands and tell each other, 'Good game'? No! Victory must be real. It must be earned. That means it must be rare and difficult, against steep odds, and defeat must be the other possibility." The goddess's two horses nipped at each other as if getting into the spirit. Okay, Leo said. I can tell you've got strong feelings about that, but the real war is against Gaia. He's right, Hazel said. Nike, you was Zeus's charioteer in the last war of the giants, weren't you? Of course. Then you know Gaia is the real enemy. We need your help to defeat her. The war isn't between the Greeks and Romans. Victoria roared. The Greeks must perish. Victory or death, Nike wailed. One side must prevail. Frank grunted. I get enough of this from my dad screaming in my head. Victoria glared down at him. A child of Mars, are you? A praetor of Rome? No true Roman would spare the Greeks. I cannot abide to be split and confused. I cannot think straight. Kill them. Win. Not happening, Frank said, though Leo noticed Zhang's right eye was twitching. Leo was struggling too. Nike was sending off waves of tension, setting his nerves on fire. He felt like he was crouched at the starting line, waiting for someone to yell, "Go!" He had the irrational desire to wrap his hands around Frank's neck, which was stupid, since his hands wouldn't even fit around Frank's neck. Look, Miss Victory, Percy tried for a smile. We don't like to interrupt your crazy time. Maybe you can just finish this conversation with yourself and we'll come back later with some bigger weapons and possibly some sedatives? The goddess brandished her spear. You will determine the matter once and for all. Today, now you will decide the victor. 4 of you. Excellent. We will have teams. Perhaps girls versus boys? Hazel said, no. Shirts versus skins. Definitely no, said Hazel. Greeks versus Romans, Nike cried. Yes, of course. 2 and 2. The last demigod standing wins. The others will die gloriously. A competitive urge pulsed through Leo's body. It took all of his effort not to reach in his tool belt, grab a mallet and whop Hazel and Frank upside their heads. He realised how right Annabeth had been not to send anyone whose parents had natural rivalries. If Jason were here, he and Percy would probably already be on the ground, bashing each other's brains out. He forced his fist to unclench. Look, lady, we're not going to go all Hunger Games on each other. Isn't going to happen. But you will win a fabulous honour. Nike reached into a basket at her side and produced a wreath of thick green laurels. This crown of leaves could be yours. You can wear it on your head. Think of the glory. Leo's right, Frank said, though his eyes were fixed on the wreath. His expression was a little too greedy for Leo's taste. We don't fight each other. We fight the giants. You should help us. Very well. The goddess raised the laurel wreath in one hand and her spear in the other. Percy and Leo exchanged looks. Does that mean you'll join us? Percy asked. You'll help us fight the giants? That will be part of the prize, Nike said. Whoever wins, I will consider you an ally. We will fight the giants together, and I will bestow victory upon you. But there can only be one winner. The others must be defeated, killed, destroyed utterly. So what will it be, demigods? Will you succeed in your quest, or will you cling to your namby-pamby ideas of friendship and everybody wins participation awards? Percy uncapped his pen. Riptide grew into a celestial bronze sword. Leo was worried he might turn it on them. Nike's aura was that hard to resist. Instead, Percy pointed his blade at Nike. What if we fight you instead? Ha! Nike's eyes gleamed. If you refuse to fight each other, you shall be persuaded. Nike spread her golden wings. 4 metal feathers fluttered down, 2 on either side of the chariot. The feathers twirled like gymnasts, growing larger, sprouting arms and legs, until they touched the ground as 4 metallic, human-sized replicas of the goddess, each armed with a golden spear and a celestial bronze laurel wreath that looked suspiciously like a barbed wire frisbee. To the stadium, the goddess cried. You have 5 minutes to prepare, then blood shall be spilled. Leo was about to say, what if he refused to go to the stadium? He got his answer before asking the question. Run, Nike bellowed, to the stadium with you, or my Nikai will kill you where you stand. The metal ladies unhinged their jaws and blasted out a sound like a Super Bowl crowd mixed with feedback. They shook their spears and charged the demigods. It wasn't Leo's finest moment. Panic seized him, and he took off. His only comfort was that his friends did too, and they weren't the cowardly type. The 4 metal women swept behind them in loose semicircle, herding them to the northeast. All the tourists had vanished. Perhaps they'd fled to their air-conditioned comfort of the museum, or maybe Nike had somehow forced them to leave. The demigods ran, tripping over stones, leaping over crumbled walls, dodging around columns and informational placards. Behind them, Nike's chariot wheels rumbled and her horses whinnied. Every time Leo thought about slowing down, the metal ladies screamed again. What had Nike called them? Nikai? Nikettes? Filling Leo with terror. He hated being filled with terror. It was embarrassing. There! Frank sprinted towards a kind of trench between 2 earthen walls with a stone archway above. It reminded Leo of those tunnels that football teams run through when they enter the field. That's the entrance to the old Olympic Stadium. It's called the Crypt. Not a good name, Leo yelled. Why are we going there? Percy gasped. If that's where she wants us. The Niquettes screamed again, and all rational thought abandoned Leo. He ran for the tunnel. When they reached the arch, Hazel yelled, Hold it! They stumbled to a stop. Percy doubled over, wheezing. Leo had noticed that Percy seemed to get winded more easily these days, probably because of that nasty acid air he'd been forced to breathe in Tartarus. Frank peered back the way they'd come. I don't see them anymore. They disappeared. Did they give up? Percy asked hopefully. Leo scanned the ruins. Nah, they just herded us where they wanted us. What are those things anyway? The Niquettes, I mean. Niquettes? Frank scratched his head. I think it was Nikai, plural, like victories. Yes. Hazel looked deep in thought, running her hands along the stone archway. In some legends, Nike had an army of little victories she could send all over the world to do her bidding. Like Santa's elves, Percy said, except evil and metal and really loud. Hazel pressed her fingers against the arch, as if taking its pulse. Beyond the narrow tunnel, the earthen walls opened into a long field with gently rising slopes on either side, like seating for spectators. Leo guessed it would have been an open-air stadium back in the day, big enough for discus throwing, javelin catching, naked shot put, or whatever else those crazy Greeks used to do to win a bunch of leaves. Ghosts linger in this place, Hazel murmured. A lot of pain is embedded in these stones. Please tell me you have a plan, Leo said, preferably one that doesn't involve embedding my pain in the stones. Hazel's eyes were stormy and distant, the way they'd been in the House of Hades, like she was peering into a different layer of reality. This was the players' entrance. Nike said we have 5 minutes to prepare, then she'll expect us to pass under this archway and begin the games. We won't be allowed to leave that field until 3 of us are dead. Percy leaned on his sword. I'm pretty sure death, marches or matches weren't an Olympic sport. Well, they are today, Hazel warned, but I might be able to give us an edge. When we pass through, I could raise some obstacles on the field, hiding places to buy us some time. Frank frowned. You mean like on the field of Mars? Trenches, tunnels, that kind of thing? You can do that with a mist? I think so, Hazel said. Nike would probably like to see the obstacle course. I can play her expectations against her. But it would be more than that. I can use any subterranean gateway, even this arch, to access the labyrinth. I can raise part of the labyrinth to the surface. Whoa, 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 whoa. Percy made a time-out sign. The labyrinth is bad. We discussed this. Hazel, he's right. Leo remembered all too well how she'd led them through the illusionary maze in the House of Hades. They'd almost died about every 6 feet. I mean, I know you're good with magic, but we've already got 4 screaming Niquettes to worry about. You'll have to trust me, she said. We've only got a couple of minutes now. When we pass through the arch, I can at least manipulate the playing field to our advantage. Percy exhaled through his nose. Twice now, I've been forced to fight in stadiums. Once in Rome and before that in the labyrinth. I hate playing games for people's amusement. We all do, Hazel said. But we have to put Nike off guard. We'll pretend to fight until we can neutralise those Niquettes. That's an awful name. Then we subdue Nike, like Juno said. Makes sense, Frank agreed. You felt how powerful Nike was, trying to put us at each other's throats. If she's sending out those vibes to all the Greeks and Romans, there's no way we'll be able to prevent a war. We've got to get her under control. And how do we do that? Percy asked. Bonk her on the head and stuff her in a sack? Leo's mental gears, started to turn. Actually, he said, you're not far off. Uncle Leo brought some toys for all you good little demigods. Chapter 12. Leo. 2 minutes wasn't nearly enough time. Leo hoped he'd given everybody the right gadgets and adequately explained what all the buttons did. Otherwise, things would get ugly. While he was lecturing Frank and Percy on Archimedean mechanics, Hazel stared at the stoned archway and muttered under her breath. Nothing seemed to change in the big grassy field beyond, but Leo was sure Hazel had some Mr-licious tricks up her sleeve. He was just explaining to Frank how to avoid getting decapitated by his own Archimedes sphere when the sound of trumpets echoed through the stadium. Nike's chariot appeared on the field, the Niquettes arrayed in front of her with their spears and laurels raised. Begin, the goddess bellowed. Percy and Leo sprinted through the archway. Immediately, the field shimmered and became a maze of brick walls and trenches. They ducked behind the nearest wall and ran to the left. Back at the archway, Frank yelled, Die, Gracchus scum! A poorly aimed arrow sailed over Leo's head. More vicious, Nike yelled. Kill like you mean it. Leo glanced at Percy. Ready? Percy hefted a bronze grenade. "I hope you labelled these right," he yelled. "Die, Romans!" and lobbed the grenade over the wall. Boom! Leo couldn't see the explosion, but the smell of buttery popcorn filled the air. "Oh no," Hazel wailed. "Popcorn! Our fatal weakness!" Frank shot another arrow over their heads. Leo and Percy scrambled to the left, ducking through a maze of walls that seemed to shift and turn on their own. Leo could still see open sky above him, like claustrophobia starting to set in, making it hard for him to breathe. Somewhere behind them, Nike yelled, "Try harder! That popcorn was not fatal!" From the rumble of her chariot wheels, Leo guessed she was circling the perimeter of the field. Victory taking a victory lap. Another grenade exploded over Percy's and Leo's heads. They dived into a trench as the green starburst of Greek fire singed Leo's hair. Fortunately, Frank had aimed high enough that the blast only looked impressive. "Better," Nike called out. "But where is your aim? Don't you want this circlet of leaves?" "I wish the river was closer," Percy muttered. "I want to drown her." "Be patient, water boy." "Don't call me water boy." Leo pointed across the field. The walls had shifted, revealing one of the Niquettes about 30 yards away, standing with her back to them. Hazel must be doing her thing, manipulating the maze to isolate their targets. "I distract," Leo said. "You attack. Ready?" Percy nodded. "Go." He dashed to the left as Leo pulled a ball-peen hammer from his tool belt and yelled, "Hey, bronze butt!" The Niquette turned as Leo threw. His hammer clanged harmlessly off the metal lady's chest, but she must have been annoyed. She marched towards him, raising her barbed wire laurel wreath. Oops! Leo ducked as the metal circlet spun over his head. The wreath hit a wall behind him, punching a hole straight through the bricks, then arced backwards through the air like a boomerang. As the Niquette raised her hand to catch it, Percy emerged from the trench behind her and slashed with riptide, cutting the Niquette in half at the waist. The metal wreath shot past him and embedded in a marble column. "Foul!" the victory goddess cried. The wall shifted and Leo saw her barrelling towards them in her chariot. "You don't attack the Nikai unless you wish to die!" A trench appeared in the goddess's path, causing her horses to balk. Leo and Percy ran for cover. Out of the corner of his eye, maybe 50 feet away, Leo saw Frank, the grizzly bear, jump from the top of a wall and flatten another Niquette. 2 bronze butts down, 2 more to go. "No!" Nike screamed in outrage. "No, no, no! Your lives are forfeit! Nikai, attack!" Leo and Percy leapt behind a wall. They lay there for a second, trying to catch their breath. Leo had trouble getting his bearings, but he guessed that was part of Hazel's plan. She was causing the terrain to shift around them, opening new trenches, changing the slope of the land, throwing up new walls and columns. With luck, she would make it harder for the Niquettes to find them. Travelling just 20 feet might take them several minutes. Still, Leo hated being disoriented. It reminded him of his helplessness in the House of Hades, the way Clytius had smothered him in darkness, snuffing out his fire, possessing his voice. It reminded him of Chione, plucking him off the deck of the Argo II with a gust of wind and shooting him halfway across the Mediterranean. It was bad enough being scrawny and weak. If Leo couldn't control his own senses, his own voice, his own body, that didn't leave him much to rely on. "Hey," Percy said, "if we don't make it out of this..." "Shut up, man. We're going to make it. If we don't, I want you to know. I feel bad about Calypso. I failed her." Leo stared at him, dumbfounded. "You know about me and..." "The Argo II is a small ship," Percy grimaced. "Word got around. When I was in Tartarus, I was reminded that I hadn't followed through on my promise to Calypso. I asked the gods to free her and then I just assumed they would. With me getting amnesia and getting sent to Camp Jupiter and all, I didn't think about Calypso much after that. I'm not making excuses. I should have made sure the gods kept their promise. Anyway, I'm glad you found her. You promised to find a way back to her, and I just wanted to say, if we do survive all this, I'll do anything I can to help you. That's a promise I will keep." Leo was speechless. Here they were, hiding behind a wall in the middle of a magical war zone, with grenades and grizzly bears and bronze butt Niquettes to worry about, and Percy pulls this on him? "Man, what is your problem?" Leo grumbled. Percy blinked. "So, I guess we're not cool?" "Of course we're not cool. You're as bad as Jason. I'm trying to resent you for being all perfect and hero-y and whatnot. Then you go and act like a stand-up guy. How am I supposed to hate you if you apologise and promise to help and stuff?" A smile tugged at the corner of Percy's mouth. "Sorry about that." The ground rumbled as another grenade exploded, sending spirals of whipped cream into the sky. "That's Hazel's signal," Leo said. "They've taken down another Niquette." Percy peeked around the corner of the wall. Until this moment, Leo hadn't realised how much he'd resented Percy. The dude had always intimidated him. Knowing Calypso had had a crush on Percy had made the feeling 10 times worse. But now, the knot of anger in his gut started to unravel. Leo just couldn't dislike this guy. Percy seemed sincere about being sorry and wanting to help. Besides, Leo finally had confirmation that Percy Jackson was out of the picture with Calypso. The air was cleared. All Leo had to do was to find his way back to Aegea, and he would, assuming he survived the next 10 days. "One Niket left," Percy said. "I wonder." Somewhere close by, Hazel cried out in pain. Instantly, Leo was on his feet. "Dude, wait!" Percy called, but Leo plunged through the maze, his heart pounding. The walls fell away on either side. Leo found himself in an open stretch of field. Frank stood at the far end of the stadium, shooting flaming arrows at Nike's chariot as the goddess bellowed insults and tried to find a path to him across the shifting network of trenches. Hazel was closer, maybe 60 feet away. The fourth Niket had obviously sneaked up on her. Hazel was limping away from her attacker, her jeans ripped, her left leg bleeding. She parried the metal lady's spear with her huge cavalry sword, but she was about to be overpowered. All around her, the mist flickered like a dying strobe light. She was losing control of the magic maze. "I'll help her," Percy said. "You stick to the plan. Get Nike's chariot." But the plan was to eliminate all 4 Nikets first. So change the plan and then stick to it. That doesn't even make sense. But go, help her. Percy rushed to Hazel's defense. Leo darted towards Nike, yelling, "Hey, I want a participation award!" Gah! The goddess pulled the reins and turned her chariot in his direction. "I will destroy you!" "Good," Leo yelled. Losing is way better than winning. "What?" Nike threw her mighty spear, but her aim was off with the rocking of the chariot. Her weapon skittered into the grass. Sadly, a new one appeared in her hands. She urged her horses to full gallop. The trenches disappeared, leaving an open field, perfect for running down small Latino demigods. "Hey!" Frank yelled from across the stadium. "I want a participation award too! Everybody wins!" He shot a well-aimed arrow that landed in the back of Nike's chariot and began to burn. Nike ignored it. Her eyes were fixed on Leo. "Percy!" Leo's voice sounded like a hamster's squeak. From his tool belt, he fished out an Archimedes sphere and set the concentric circles to arm the device. Percy was still sparring with the last metal lady. Leo couldn't wait. He threw the sphere in the chariot's path. It hit the ground and burrowed in, but he needed Percy to spring the trap. If Nike sensed any threat, she apparently didn't think of much of it. She kept charging at Leo. The chariot was 20 feet from the grenade. 15 feet. "Percy!" Leo yelled. "Operation Water Balloon!" Unfortunately, Percy was a little busy getting smacked around. The Niket thumped him backwards with the butt of her spear. She threw her reef with such force it knocked Percy's sword from his grip. Percy stumbled. The metallic lady moved in for the kill. Leo howled. He knew the distance was too far. He knew that if he didn't jump out of the way now, Nike would run him over. But that didn't matter. His friends were about to be skewered. He thrust out his hand and shot a white-hot bolt of fire straight at the Niket. It literally melted her face. The Niket staggered, her spear still raised. Before she could regain her balance, Hazel thrust her spapper and impaled the metal lady through the chest. The Niket crashed into the grass. Percy turned towards the Victory Goddess's chariot. Just as those huge white horses were about to turn Leo into roadkill, the carriage passed over Leo's sunken grenade, which exploded in a high-pressure geyser. Water blasted upward, flipping the chariot, horses, carriage, goddess and all. Back in Houston, Leo used to live with his mum in an apartment right off the Gulf Freeway. He heard car crashes at least once a week, but this sound was worse. Celestial bronze crumpling, wood splintering, stallions screaming and a goddess wailing in 2 distinct voices, both of them very surprised. Hazel collapsed. Percy caught her. Frank ran towards them from across the field. Leo was on his own as the goddess Nike disentangled herself from the wreckage and rose to face him. Her braided hairdo now resembled a stepped-on cowpat. A laurel wreath was stuck around her left ankle. Her horses got to their hooves and galloped away in a panic, dragging the soaked, half-burning wreckage of the chariot behind them. "You!" Nike glared at Leo, her eyes hotter and brighter than her metal wings. "You dare?" Leo didn't feel very courageous, but he forced a smile. "I know, right? I'm awesome. Do I win a leaf hat now?" "You will die." The goddess raised her spear. "Hold that thought." Leo dug around in his tool belt. "You haven't seen my best trick yet. I have a weapon guaranteed to win any contest." Nike hesitated. "What weapon? What do you mean?" "My ultimate Zap-O-Matic." He pulled out a second Archimedes sphere. the one he'd spent a whole 30 seconds modifying before they entered the stadium. How many laurel wreaths have you got? Because I'm going to win them all. He fiddled with dials, hoping he'd done his calculations right. Leo had got better at making spheres, but they still weren't completely reliable. More like 20% reliable. It would have been nice to have Calypso's help weaving the celestial bronze filaments. She was an ace at weaving. Or Annabeth. She was no slouch. But Leo had done his best, rewiring the sphere to carry out two completely different functions. Behold! Leo clicked the final dial. The sphere opened. One side elongated into a gun handle. The other side unfolded into a miniature radar dish made of a celestial bronze mirror. Nike frowned. What is that supposed to be? An Archimedes death ray, Leo said. I finally perfected it. Now give me all the prizes. Those things don't work, Nike yelled. They proved it on television. Besides, I'm an immortal goddess. You can't destroy me. Watch closely, Leo said. Are you watching? Nike could have zapped him into a grease spot or smeared him like a cheese wedge, but her curiosity got the best of her. She stared straight into the dish as Leo flipped the switch. Leo knew to look away. Even so, the blazing beam of light left him seeing spots. Gah! The goddess staggered. She dropped her spear and clutched at her eyes. I'm blind! I'm blind! Leo hit another button on his death ray. It collapsed back into a sphere and began to hum. Leo counted silently to 3 and then tossed the sphere at the goddess's feet. Foom! Metal filaments shot upward, wrapping Nike in a bronze net. She wailed, falling sideways as the net constricted, forcing her two forms, Greek and Roman, into a quivering out-of-focus hole. Trickery! Her doubled voices buzzed like muffled alarm clocks. Your death ray did not even kill me. I don't need to kill you, Leo said. I vanquished you. Just fine. I will simply change form, she cried. I will rip apart your silly net. I will destroy you. Yeah, see, you can't. Leo hoped he was right. That's high-quality celestial bronze netting, and I'm a son of Hephaestus. He's kind of an expert on catching goddesses in nets. No! No! Leo left her thrashing and cursing, and went to check on his friends. Percy looked all right, just sore and bruised. Frank had propped Hazel up and was feeding her ambrosia. The cut on her leg had stopped bleeding, though her jeans were pretty much ruined. I'm okay, she said. Just too much magic. You were awesome, Levesque. Leo did his best Hazel imitation. Popcorn, our fatal weakness. She smiled wanly. Together the four of them walked over to Nike, who was still writhing and flapping her wings in the net like a golden chicken. What do we do with her? Percy asked. Take her aboard the Argo too, Leo said. Chuck her in one of the horse stalls. Hazel's eyes widened. You're going to keep the goddess of victory in the stable? Why not? Once we sort things out between Greeks and Romans, the gods should go back to their normal selves. Then we can free her and she can, grant us victory. Grant you victory? The goddess cried. Never! You will suffer for this outrage. Your blood shall be spilled. One of you here, one of you four, is fated to die battling Gaia. Leo's intestines tied themselves into a slipknot. How do you know that? I can foresee victories, Nike yelled. You will have no success without death. Release me and fight each other. It is better you die here than face what is to come. Hazel stuck the point of her spather under Nike's chin. Explain. Her voice was harder than Leo had ever heard. Which of us will die? How do we stop it? Ah, child of Pluto. Your magic helped you cheat in this contest, but you cannot cheat destiny. One of you will die. One of you must die. No, Hazel insisted. There's another way. There is always another path. Hecate taught you this? Nike laughed. You would hope for the physician's cure, perhaps, but that is impossible. Too much stands in your way. The poison of Pylos, the chained god's heartbeat in Sparta, the curse of Delos. No, you cannot cheat death. Frank knelt. He gathered up the net under Nike's chin and raised her face to his. What are you talking about? How do you find this cure? I will not help you, Nike growled. I will curse you with my power, net or no. She began to mutter in ancient Greek. Frank looked up, scowling. Can she really cast magic through this net? Heck if I know, Leo said. Frank let go of the goddess. He took off one of his shoes, peeled off his sock, and stuffed it in the goddess's mouth. Dude, Percy said, that is disgusting. Nike complained. Leo, Frank said grimly, you got duct tape? Never leave home without it. He fished a roll from his tool belt, and in no time Frank had wrapped it around Nike's head, securing the gag in her mouth. Well, it's not a laurel wreath, Frank said, but it's a new kind of victory circle, the gag of duct tape. Zang, Leo said. You got style. Nike thrashed and grunted until Percy nudged her with his toe. Hey, shut up. You behave or we'll get Arion back here and let him nibble your wings. He loves gold. Nike shrieked once and then became still and quiet. So, Hazel sounded a little nervous. We have one tied-up goddess. Now what? Frank folded his arms. We go looking for this physician's cure, whatever that is, because personally, I like cheating death. Leo grinned. Poison in Pylos, a chained god's heartbeat in Sparta, a curse in Delos. Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. Chapter 13. Nico. The last thing Nico heard was Coach Hedge grumbling, well, this isn't good. He wondered what he'd done wrong this time. Maybe he'd teleported them into a den of cyclopses or 1,000 feet above another volcano. There was nothing he could do about it. His vision was gone. His other senses were shutting down. His knees buckled and he passed out. He tried to make the most of his unconsciousness. Dreams and death were old friends of his. He knew how to navigate their dark borderland. He sent out his thoughts, searching for Thalia Grace. He rushed past the usual fragments of painful memories, his mother smiling down at him, her face illuminated by the sunlight rippling off the Venetian Grand Canal. His sister Bianca laughing as she pulled him across the Mall in Washington, D.C., her green floppy hat shading her eyes and the splash of freckles across her nose. He saw Percy Jackson on a snowy cliff outside Westover Hall, shielding Nico and Bianca from the manticore as Nico clutched a mythomagic figurine and whispered, I'm scared. He saw Minos, his old ghostly mentor, leading him through the labyrinth. Minos' smile was cold and cruel. Don't worry, son of Hades, you will have your revenge. Nico couldn't stop the memories. They cluttered his dreams like the ghosts of Asphodel. An aimless, sorrowful mob pleading for attention. Save me, they seemed to whimper. Remember me. Help me. Comfort me. He didn't dare stop to dwell on them. They would only crush him with wants and regrets. The best he could do was to stay focused and push through. I am the son of Hades, he thought. I go where I wish. The darkness is my birthright. He forged ahead through a grey and black terrain, looking for the dreams of Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus. Instead, the ground dissolved at his feet and he fell into a familiar backwater, the Hypnos cabin at Camp Half-Blood. Buried under piles of feather comforters, snoring demigods nestled in their bunks. Above the mantel, a dark tree branch dripped milky water from the river Lethe into a bowl. A cheerful fire crackled in the fireplace. In front of it, in a leather armchair, dozed the head counsellor for Cabin 15, a pot-bellied guy with unruly blonde hair and a gentle bovine face. Clovis, Nico growled, for the god's sake, stop dreaming so powerfully. Clovis's eyes fluttered open. He turned and stared at Nico, though Nico knew this was simply part of Clovis's own dreamscape. The actual Clovis would still be snoring in his armchair back at camp. Oh, hi. Clovis yawned wide enough to swallow a minor god. Sorry, did I pull you off course again? Nico gritted his teeth. There was no point getting upset. The Hypnos cabin was like Grand Central Station for dream activity. You couldn't travel anywhere without going through it once in a while. As long as I'm here, Nico said, pass along a message. Tell Chiron I'm on my way with a couple of friends. We're bringing the Athena Parthenos. Clovis rubbed his eyes. So it's true. How are you bringing it? Did you rent a van or something? Nico explained as concisely as possible. Messages sent through dreams tended to get fuzzy around the edges, especially when you were dealing with Clovis. The simpler the better. We're being followed by a hunter, Nico said. One of Gaia's giants, I think. Can you get that message to Thalia Grace? You're better at finding people in dreams than I am. I need her advice. I'll try. Clovis fumbled for a cup of hot chocolate on the side table. Before you go, do you have a second? Clovis, this is a dream, Nico reminded him. Time is fluid. Even as he said it, Nico worried about what was happening in the real world. His physical self might be plummeting to his death, or surrounded by monsters. Still, he couldn't force himself to wake up, not after the amount of energy he'd expended on a shadow travel. Clovis nodded. Right, I was thinking you should probably see what happened today at the Council of War. I slept through some of it, but, show me, Nico said. The scene changed. Nico found himself in the rec room of the big house, all the senior camp leaders gathered around the ping-pong table. At one end sat Chiron the centaur. His equine posterior collapsed into his magic wheelchair, so he looked like a regular human. His curly brown hair and beard had more grey streaks than a few months ago. Deep lines etched his face. Things we can't control, he was saying. Now let's review our defences. Where do we stand? Clarice from the Ares cabin sat forward. She was the only one in full armour, which was typical. Clarice probably slept in her combat gear. As she spoke, she gestured with her dagger, which made the other councillors lean away from her. Our defensive line is mostly solid, she said. The campers are as ready to fight as they'll ever be. We control the beach. Our triremes are unchallenged on Long Island Sound. But those stupid giant eagles dominate our airspace. Inland, in all three directions, the barbarians have us completely cut off. They're Romans, said Rachel Dare, doodling with a marker on the knee of her jeans. Not barbarians. Clarice pointed her dagger at Rachel. What about their allies, huh? Did you see that tribe of two-headed men that arrived yesterday, or the glowing red dog-headed guys with the big poleaxes? They look completely barbaric to me. It would have been nice if you'd foreseen any of that, if your oracle power didn't break down when we needed it most. Rachel's face turned as red as her hair. That's hardly my fault. Something is wrong with Apollo's gifts of prophecy. If I knew how to fix it. She's right. Will Solis, head counsellor for the Apollo cabin, put his hand gently on Clarice's wrist. Not many campers could have done that without getting stabbed, but Will had a way of diffusing people's anger. He got her to lower her dagger. Everyone in our cabin has been affected. It's not just Rachel. Will's shaggy blonde hair and pale blue eyes reminded Nico of Jason Grace, but the similarities ended there. Jason was a fighter. You could tell from the intensity of his stare, his constant alertness, the coiled-up energy in his frame. Will Solis was more like a lanky cat stretched out in the sunshine. His movements were relaxed and non-threatening, his gaze soft and far away. In his faded surf Barbados t-shirt, his cut-off shorts and flip-flops, he looked about as unaggressive as a demigod could get. But Nico knew he was brave under fire. During the Battle of Manhattan, Nico had seen him in action, the camp's best combat medic, risking his life to save wounded campers. We don't know what's going on at Delphi, Will continued. My dad hasn't answered any prayers or appeared in any dreams. I mean, all the gods have been silent, but this isn't like Apollo. Something's wrong. Across the table, Jake Mason grunted. Probably this Roman dirt wipe who's leading the attack. Octavian, what's his name? If I was Apollo and my descendant was acting that way, I'd go into hiding out of shame. I agree, Will said. I wish I was a better archer. I wouldn't mind shooting my Roman relative off his high horse. Actually, I wish I could use any of my father's gifts to stop this war. He looked down at his own hands with distaste. Unfortunately, I'm just a healer. Your talents are essential, Chiron said. I fear we'll need them soon enough. As for seeing the future, what about the harpy, Ella? Has she offered any advice from the Sibylline books? Rachel shook her head. The poor thing is scared out of her wits. Harpies hate being imprisoned. Ever since the Romans surrounded us, well, she feels trapped. She knows Octavian means to capture her. It's all Tyson and I can do to keep her from flying away. Which would be suicide. Butch Walker, son of Iris, crossed his burly arms. With those Roman eagles in the air, flying isn't safe. I've already lost 2 Pegasi. At least Tyson brought some of his Cyclops friends to help out, Rachel said. That's a little good news. Over by the refreshment table, Connor Stoll laughed. He had a fistful of Ritz crackers in one hand and a can of Easy Cheese in the other. 12 full-grown Cyclopses. That's a lot of good news. Plus, Lou Ellen and the Hecate kids have been putting up magic barriers, and the whole Hermes cabin has been lining the hills with traps and snares and all kinds of nice surprises for the Romans. Jake Mason frowned, most of which you stole from Bunker 9 and the Hephaestus cabin. Clarice grumbled in agreement. They even stole the landmines from around the Ares cabin. How do you steal live landmines? We commandeered them from the war effort. Connor sprayed a glob of Easy Cheese into his mouth. Besides, you guys have plenty of toys. You can share. Chiron turned to his left, where the satyr Grover Underwood sat in silence, fingering his reed pipes. Grover, what news from the nature spirits? Grover heaved a sigh. Even on a good day, it's hard to organise nymphs and dryads. With Gaia stirring, they're almost as disoriented as the gods. Katie and Miranda from the Demeter cabin are out there right now trying to help. But if the Earth Mother wakes... He looked around the table nervously. Well, I can't promise the woods will be safe, or the hills, or the strawberry fields, or... Great. Jake Mason elbowed Clovis, who was starting to nod off. So what do we do? Attack. Clarice pounded the ping-pong table, which made everyone flinch. The Romans are getting more reinforcements by the day. We know they plan to invade on August 1st. Why should we let them set the timetable? I can only guess they're waiting to gather more forces. They already outnumber us. We should attack now before they get any stronger. Take the fight to them. Malcolm, the acting head counsellor for Athena, coughed into his fist. Clarice, I get your point, but have you studied Roman engineering? Their temporary camp is better defended than Camp Half-Blood. Attack them at their base and we'd be massacred. So we just wait? Clarice demanded. Let them get all their forces prepared while Gaia gets closer to waking? I have Coach Hedge's pregnant wife under my protection. I am not going to let anything happen to her. I owe Hedge my life. Besides, I've been training the campers more than you have, Malcolm. Their morale is low. Everybody is scared. If we're under siege another 9 days. We should stick to Annabeth's plan. Connor Stoll looked about, as serious as he ever did, despite the easy cheese around his mouth. We have to hold out until she gets that Magic Athena statue back here. Clarice rolled her eyes. You mean if that Roman praetor gets the statue back here? I don't understand what Annabeth was thinking. Collaborating with the enemy. Even if the Roman manages to bring us the statue, which is impossible, we're supposed to trust that that will bring peace? The statue arrives and suddenly the Romans lay down their weapons and start dancing around throwing flowers? Rachel set down her marker pen. Annabeth knows what she's doing. We have to try for peace. Unless we can unite the Greeks and Romans, the gods won't be healed. Unless the gods are healed, there's no way we can kill the giants. And unless we kill the giants... Gaia wakes, Connor said. Game over. Look, Clarice, Annabeth sent me a message from Tartarus. From fricking Tartarus. Anybody who can do that. Hey, I listened to them. Clarice opened her mouth to reply, but when she spoke, it was Coach Hedge's voice. Nico, wake up. We've got problems. Chapter 14, Nico. Nico sat up so quickly he headbutted the satyr in the nose. Ow, geez, kid. You got a hard noggin. Sorry, Coach. Nico blinked, trying to get his bearings. What's going on? He didn't see any immediate threat. They were camped on a sunny lawn in the middle of a public square. Beds of orange marigolds bloomed all around them. Raina was sleeping curled up, with her 2 metal dogs at her feet. A stone's throw away, little kids played tag around a white marble fountain. At a nearby pavement cafe, 6 people sipped coffee in the shade of patio umbrellas. A few delivery vans were parked along the edges of the square, but there was no traffic. The only pedestrians were a few families, probably locals, enjoying a warm afternoon. The square itself was paved with cobblestones, edged with white stucco buildings and lemon trees. In the centre stood the well-preserved shell of a Roman temple. Its square base stretched maybe 50 feet wide and 10 feet tall, with an intact facade of Corinthian columns rising another 25 feet, and at the top of the colonnade. Nico's mouth went dry. Oh, sticks. The Athena Parthenos lay sideways along the tops of the columns like a nightclub singer sprawled across a piano. Lengthwise, she fitted almost perfectly, but with Nike in her extended hand, she was a bit too wide. She looked like she might topple forward at any moment. What is she doing up there? Nico asked. You tell me. Hedge rubbed his bruised nose. That's where we appeared. Almost fell to our deaths, but luckily I've got nimble hooves. You were unconscious, hanging in your harness like a tangled paratrooper until we managed to get you down. Nico tried to picture that, and then decided he'd rather not. Is this Spain? Portugal, Hedge said. You overshot. By the way, Raina speaks Spanish. She does not speak Portuguese. Anyway, while you were asleep, we figured out this city is Evora. Good news, it's a sleepy little place. Nobody's bothered us. Nobody seems to notice the giant Athena sleeping on top of the Roman temple, which is called the Temple of Diana, in case you were wondering. And people here appreciate my street performances. I've made about 16 euros. He picked up his baseball cap, which jangled with coins. Nico felt ill. Street performances. A little singing, the coach said. A little martial arts, some interpretive dance. Wow. I know. The Portuguese have taste. Anyway, I suppose this was a decent place to lie low for a couple of days. Nico stared at him. A couple of days? Hey, kid, we didn't have much choice. In case you haven't noticed, you've been working yourself to death with all that shadow jumping. We tried to wake you up last night. No dice. So, I've been asleep for about 36 hours. You needed it. Nico was glad he was sitting down. Otherwise, he would have fallen down. He could have sworn he'd only slept a few minutes. But as his drowsiness faded, he realised he felt more clear-headed and rested than he had in weeks. Maybe since before he went looking for the doors of death. His stomach growled. Coach Hedge raised his eyebrows. You must be hungry, said the satyr. Either that or your stomach speaks hedgehog. That was quite a statement in hedgehog. Food would be good, Nico agreed. But first, what's the bad news? I mean, aside from the statue being sideways, you said we had trouble. Oh, right. The coach pointed to a gated archway at the corner of the square. Standing in the shadows was a glowing, vaguely human figure outlined in grey flames. The spirit's features were indistinct, but it seemed to be beckoning to Nico. Burning Man showed up a few minutes ago, said Coach Hedge. He doesn't get any closer. When I tried to go over there, he disappeared. Not sure if he's a threat, but he seems to be asking for you. Nico assumed it was a trap. Most things were, but Coach Hedge promised he could guard Rayner for a little longer, and on the off chance the spirit had something useful to say, Nico decided it was worth the risk. He unsheathed his Stygian iron blade and approached the archway. Normally ghosts didn't scare him, assuming of course Gaia had encased them in shells of stone and turned them into killing machines. That had been a new one for him. After his experience with Minos, Nico realised that most spectres held only as much power as you allowed them to have. They pried into your mind, using fear or anger or longing to influence you. Nico had learned to shield himself. Sometimes he could even turn the tables and bend ghosts to his will. As he approached the fiery grey apparition, he was fairly sure it was a garden variety wraith, a lost soul who had died in pain. Shouldn't be a problem. Nico took nothing for granted. He remembered Croatia all too well. He'd gone into that situation smug and confident, only to have his feet swept out from under him, literally and emotionally. First, Jason Grace had grabbed him and flown him over a wall. Then, the god Favonius had dissolved him into wind. And as for that arrogant thug Cupid, Nico clenched his sword. Sharing his secret crush hadn't been the worst of it. Eventually, he might have done that. In his own time, in his own way. But being forced to talk about Percy, being bullied and harassed and strong-armed simply for Cupid's amusement? Tendrils of darkness were now spreading out from his feet, killing all the weeds between the cobblestones. Nico tried to rein in his anger. When he reached the ghost, he saw it wore a monk's habit, sandals, woolen robes, and a wooden cross around his neck. Grey flames swirled around him, burning his sleeves, blistering his face, turning his eyebrows to ashes. He seemed to be stuck in the moment of his immolation, like a black and white video on a permanent loop. You were burned alive, Nico sensed. Probably in the Middle Ages? The ghost's face distorted in a silent scream of agony, but his eyes looked bored, even a little annoyed, as if the scream was just an automatic reflex he couldn't control. What do you want of me? Nico asked. The ghost gestured for Nico to follow. It turned and walked through the open gateway. Nico glanced back at Coach Hedge. The satyr just made a shooing gesture like, Go, do your underworld thing. Nico trailed the ghost through the streets of Evora. They zigzagged through narrow cobblestone walkways, past courtyards with potted hibiscus trees and white stucco buildings with butterscotch trim and wrought iron balconies. No one noticed the ghost, but the locals looked askance at Nico. A young girl with a fox terrier crossed the street to avoid him. Her dog growled, the hair on its back standing straight up like a dorsal fin. The ghost led Nico to another public square, anchored at one end by a large square church with whitewashed walls and limestone arches. The ghost passed through the portico and disappeared inside. Nico hesitated. He had nothing against churches, but this one radiated death. Inside would be tombs, or perhaps something less pleasant. He ducked through the doorway. His eyes were drawn to a side chapel, lit from within by eerie golden light. Carved over the door was a Portuguese inscription. Nico didn't speak the language, but he remembered his childhood Italian well enough to glean the general meaning. We, the bones that are here, await yours. Cheery, he muttered. He entered the chapel. At the far end stood an altar, where the fiery wraith knelt in prayer. But Nico was more interested in the room itself. The walls were constructed of bones and skulls, thousands upon thousands, cemented together. Columns of bones held up, a vaulted ceiling decorated with images of death. On one wall, like coats on a coat rack, hung the desiccated skeletal remains of two people, an adult and a small child. A beautiful room, isn't it? Nico turned. A year ago, he would have jumped out of his skin if his father suddenly appeared next to him. Now Nico was able to control his heart rate, along with his desire to knee his father in the groin and run away. Like the wraith, Hades was dressed in the habit of a Franciscan monk, which Nico found vaguely disturbing. His black robes were tied at the waist with a simple white cord. His cowl was pushed back, revealing dark hair shorn close to the scalp, and eyes that glittered like frozen tar. The god's expression was calm and content, as if he'd just come home from a lovely evening strolling through the fields of punishment, enjoying the screams of the damned. Getting some redecorating ideas? Nico asked. Maybe you could do your dining room in medieval monk skulls. Hades arched an eyebrow. I can never tell when you're joking. Why are you here, father? How are you here? Hades traced his fingers along the nearest column, leaving bleached white marks on the old bones. You're a hard mortal to find, my son. For several days I've been searching. When the sceptre of Diocletian exploded, well, that got my attention. Nico felt a flush of shame. Then he felt angry for feeling ashamed. Breaking the sceptre wasn't my fault. We were about to be overrun. Oh, The sceptre isn't important. A relic, that old, I'm surprised you got 2 uses out of it. The explosion simply gave me some clarity. It allowed me to pinpoint your location. I was hoping to speak to you in Pompeii, but it is so, Roman. This chapel was the first place where my presence was strong enough that I could appear to you as myself, by which I mean Hades, god of the dead, not split with that other manifestation. Hades breathed in the stale, dank air. I am very drawn to this place. The remains of 5,000 monks were used to build the Chapel of Bones. It serves as a reminder that life is short and death is eternal. I feel focused here. Even so, I only have a few moments. Story of our relationship, Nico thought. You only ever have a few moments. So tell me, Father, what do you want? Hades clasped his hands together in the sleeves of his robe. Can you entertain the notion that I might be able to help you, not simply because I want something? Nico almost laughed, but his chest felt too hollow. I can entertain the notion that you might be here for multiple reasons. The god frowned. I suppose that's fair enough. You seek information about Gaia's hunter. His name is Orion. Nico hesitated. He wasn't used to getting a direct answer without games or riddles or quests. Orion, like the constellation, wasn't he a friend of Artemis? He was, Hades said, a giant born to oppose the twins, Apollo and Artemis, but, much like Artemis, Orion rejected his destiny. He sought to live on his own terms. First he tried to live among mortals as a huntsman for the king of Chios. He ran into some trouble with the king's daughter. The king had Orion blinded and exiled. Nico thought back to what Raina had told him. My friend dreamed of a hunter with glowing eyes. If Orion is blind... He was blind, Hades corrected. Shortly after his exile, Orion met Hephaestus, who took pity on the giant and crafted him new mechanical eyes, even better than the originals. Orion became friends with Artemis. He was the first male ever allowed to join her hunt. But things went wrong between them. How exactly I do not know. Orion was slain. Now he has returned as a loyal son of Gaia, ready to do her bidding. He is driven by bitterness and anger. You can understand that. Nico wanted to yell, like you know what I feel. Instead he asked, how do we stop him? You cannot, Hades said. Your only hope is to outrun him. Accomplish your quest before he reaches you. Apollo or Artemis might be able to slay him, arrows against arrows. But the twins are in no condition to aid you. Even now Orion has your scent. His hunting pack is almost upon you. You won't have the luxury of more rest from here to Camp Half-Blood. A belt seemed to tighten around Nico's ribs. He'd left Coach Hedge on guard duty with Raina asleep. I need to get back to my companions. Indeed, Hades said, but there is more. Your sister. Hades faltered. As always, the subject of Bianca lay between them like a loaded gun. Deadly, easy to reach, impossible to ignore. I mean, your other sister, Hazel. She has discovered that one of the 7 will die. She may try to prevent this. In doing so, she may lose sight of her priorities. Nico didn't trust himself to speak. To his surprise, his thoughts didn't leap first to Percy. His primary concern was for Hazel, then for Jason, then for Percy, and the others aboard the Argo too. They'd saved him in Rome. They'd welcomed him aboard their ship. Nico had never allowed himself the luxury of friends, but the crew of the Argo 2 was as close as he'd ever come. The idea of any of them dying made him feel empty, like he was back in the giant's bronze jar, alone in the dark, subsisting only on sour pomegranate seeds. Finally he asked, is Hazel all right? For the moment. And the others? Who will die? Hades shook his head. Even if I was certain, I could not say. I tell you this because you are my son. You know that some deaths cannot be prevented. Some deaths should not be prevented. When the time comes, you may need to act. Nico didn't know what that meant. He didn't want to know. My son. Hades' tone was almost gentle. Whatever happens, you have earned my respect. You brought honor to our house when we stood together against Kronos in Manhattan. You risked my wrath to help the Jackson boy, guiding him to the River Styx, freeing him from my prison, pleading with me to raise the armies of Erebos to assist him. Never before have I been so harassed by one of my sons. Percy this and Percy that, I nearly blasted you to cinders. Nico took a shallow breath. The walls of the room began to tremble, dust trickling from the cracks between the bones. I didn't do all that just for him. I did it because the whole world was in danger. Hades allowed himself the faintest smile, but there was nothing cruel in his eyes. I can entertain the possibility that you acted for multiple reasons. My point is this. You and I rose to the aid of Olympus because you convinced me to let go of my anger. I would encourage you to do likewise. My children are so rarely happy. I I would like to see you be an exception. Nico stared at his father. He didn't know what to do with that statement. He could accept many unreal things, hordes of ghosts, magical labyrinths, travel through shadows, chapels made of bones, but tender words from the Lord of the Underworld? No, that made no sense. Over at the altar, the fiery ghost rose. He approached, burning and screaming silently, his eyes conveying some urgent message. Ah, Hades said, this is Brother Paloin. He's one of hundreds who were burned alive in the square near the old Roman temple. The Inquisition had its headquarters there, you know. At any rate, he suggests you leave now. You have very little time before the wolves arrive. Wolves? You mean Orion's pack? Hades flicked his hand. The ghost of Brother Paloin disappeared. My son, what you are attempting, shadow travel across the world, carrying the statue of Athena, it may well destroy you. Thanks for the encouragement. Hades placed his hands briefly on Nico's shoulders. Nico didn't like to be touched, but somehow this brief contact with his father felt reassuring, the same way the Chapel of Bones was reassuring. Like death, his father's presence was cold and often callous, but it was real, brutally honest, inescapably dependable. Nico found a sort of freedom in knowing that eventually, no matter what happened, he would end up at the foot of his father's throne. I will see you again, Hades promised. I will prepare a room for you at this palace in case you do not survive. Perhaps your chambers would look good decorated with the skulls of monks. Now, I can't tell if you're joking. Hades' eyes glittered as his form began to fade. Then perhaps we are alike in some important ways. The god vanished. Suddenly the chapel felt oppressive, thousands of hollow eye sockets staring at Nico. We, the bones that are here, await yours. He hurried out of the church, hoping he remembered the way back to his friends. Chapter 15. Nico. Wolves? Raina asked. They were eating dinner from the nearby pavement cafe. Despite Hades' warning to hurry back, Nico had found nothing much changed at the camp. Raina had just awoken. The Athena Parthenos still lay sideways across the top of the temple. Coach Hedge was entertaining a few locals with tap dancing and martial arts, occasionally singing into his megaphone, though nobody seemed to understand what he was saying. Nico wished the coach hadn't brought the megaphone. Not only was it loud and obnoxious, but also, for no reason Nico understood, it occasionally blurted out random Darth Vader lines from Star Wars or yelled, "The cow goes moo!" As the three of them sat on the lawn to eat, Raina seemed alert and rested. She and Coach Hedge listened as Nico described his dreams, then his meeting with Hades at the Chapel of Bones. Nico held back a few personal details from his talk with his father, though he sensed that Raina knew plenty about wrestling with one's feelings. When he mentioned Orion and the wolves that were supposedly on their way, Raina frowned. Most wolves are friendly to Romans, she said. I've never heard stories about Orion hunting with a pack. Nico finished his ham sandwich. He eyed the plate of pastries and was surprised to find he still had an appetite. It could have been a figure of speech. Very little time before the wolves arrive. Perhaps Hades didn't literally mean wolves. At any rate, we should leave as soon as it's dark enough for shadows. Coach Hedge stuffed an issue of guns and ammo into his bag. Only problem, the Athena Parthenos is still 30 feet in the air. Gonna be fun hauling you guys and your gear to the top of that temple. Nico tried a pastry. The lady at the cafe had called them farturas. They looked like spiral donuts and tasted great. Just the right combination of crispy, sugary and buttery. But when Nico first heard fartura, he knew Percy would have made a joke out of the name. America has donuts, Percy would have said. Portugal has fart nuts. The older Nico got, the more juvenile Percy seemed to him. Though Percy was 3 years older, Nico found his sense of humour equal parts endearing and annoying. He decided to concentrate on the annoying. Then there were the times Percy was deadly serious, looking up at Nico from that chasm in Rome. The other side, Nico. Lead them there. Promise me. And Nico had promised. It didn't seem to matter how much he resented Percy Jackson. Nico would do anything for him. He hated himself for that. So, Raina's voice jarred him from his thoughts. Will Camp Half-Blood wait for August 1st, or will they attack? We have to hope they wait, Nico said. I can't get the statue back any faster. Even at this rate, my dad thinks I might die. Nico kept that thought private. He wished Hazel was with him. Together they had shadow-travelled the entire crew of the Argo 2 out to the House of Hades. When they shared their power, Nico felt like anything was possible. The trip to Camp Half-Blood could have been done in half the time. Besides, Hades' words about one of the crew dying had sent a chill through him. He couldn't lose Hazel. Not another sister. Not again. Coach Hedge looked up from counting the change in his baseball cap. And you sure Clarice and Melly are okay? Yes, coach. Clarice is taking good care of her. That's a relief. I don't like what Grover said about Gaia whispering to the nymphs and dryads. If the nature spirits turn evil, that's not going to be pretty. Nico had never heard of such a thing happening. Then again, Gaia hadn't been awake since the dawn of humanity. Raina took a bite of her pastry. Her chain mail glittered in the afternoon sun. I wonder about these wolves. Is it possible we've misunderstood the message? The goddess Lupa has been very quiet. Perhaps she is sending us aid. The wolves could be from her to defend us from Orion and his pack. The hopefulness in her voice was as thin as gauze. Nico decided not to rip through it. Maybe, he said. But wouldn't Lupa be busy with the war between the camps? I thought she'd be sending wolves to help your legion. Raina shook her head. Wolves are not frontline fighters. I don't think she would help Octavian. Her wolves might be patrolling Camp Jupiter, defending it on the Legion's absence, but I just don't know. She crossed her legs at the ankles, and the iron tips of her combat boots glinted. Nico made a mental note not to get in any kicking contests with Roman legionnaires. There's something else, she said. I haven't had any luck contacting my sister, Hilla. It makes me uneasy that both the wolves and the Amazons have gone silent. If something has happened in the west coast, I fear the only hope for either camp lies with us. We must return the statue soon. That means the greatest burden is on you, son of Hades. Nico tried to swallow his bile. He wasn't mad at Raina. He kind of liked Raina, but so often he'd been called on to do the impossible, normally as soon as he accomplished it. He was forgotten. He remembered how nice the kids at Camp Half-Blood had been to him after the war with Kronos. Great job, Nico. Thanks for bringing the armies of the underworld to save us. Everybody smiled. They all invited him to sit at their table. After about a week, his welcome wore thin. Campers would jump when he walked up behind them. He would emerge from the shadows at the campfire, startle somebody, and see the discomfort in their eyes. Are you still here? Why are you here? It didn't help that immediately after the war with Kronos, Annabeth and Percy had started dating. Nico set down his fartura. Suddenly, it didn't taste so good. He recalled his talk with Annabeth at Epirus, just before he'd left with the Athena Parthenos. She'd pulled him aside and said, "Hey, I have to talk to you." Panic had seized him. She knows. "I want to thank you," she continued. "Bob, the Titan. He only helped us in Tartarus because you were kind to him. You told him we were worth saving. That's the only reason we're alive." She said "we" so easily, as if she and Percy were interchangeable, inseparable. Nico had once read a story from Plato, who claimed that in the ancient times all humans had been a combination of male and female. Each person had 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs. Supposedly, these combo humans had been so powerful they made the gods uneasy, so Zeus split them in half, man and woman. Ever since humans had felt incomplete, they spent their lives searching for their other halves. And where does that leave me? Nico wondered. It wasn't his favourite story. He wanted to hate Annabeth, but he just couldn't. She'd gone out of her way to thank him at Epirus. She was genuine and sincere. She never overlooked him or avoided him like most people did. Why couldn't she be a horrible person? That would have made it easier. The wind god, Favonius, had warned him in Croatia. If you let your anger rule you, your fate will be even sadder than mine. But how could his fate be anything but sad? Even if he lived through this quest, he would have to leave both camps forever. That was the only way he would find peace. He wished there was another option, a choice that didn't hurt like the waters of Phlegethon, but he couldn't see one. Raina was studying him, probably trying to read his thoughts. She glanced down at his hands, and Nico realised he was twisting his silver skull ring, the last gift Bianca had given him. "Nico, how can we help you?" Raina asked. Another question he wasn't used to hearing. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "You've already let me rest as much as possible. That's important. Perhaps you can lend me your strength again. This next jump will be the longest. I'll have to muster enough energy to get us across the Atlantic." "You'll succeed," Raina promised. "Once we're back in the US, we should encounter fewer monsters. I might even be able to get help from retired legionnaires along the eastern seaboard. They are obliged to aid any Roman demigod who calls on them." Hedge grunted. "If Octavian hasn't already won them over, in which case you might find yourself arrested for treason." "Coach," Raina scolded. "Not helping." "Hey, just saying. Personally, I wish we could stay in Evora longer. Good food, good money, and so far no sign of these figurative wolves." Raina's dogs sprang to their feet. In the distance, howls pierced the air. Before Nico could stand, wolves appeared from every direction, huge black beasts leaping from the roofs, surrounding their encampment. The largest of them padded forward. The alpha wolf stood on his haunches and began to charge and change. His forelegs grew into arms, his snout shrank into a pointy nose, his grey fur morphed into a cloak of woven animal pelts. He became a tall, wiry man with a haggard face and glowing red eyes. A crown of finger bones circled his greasy black hair. "Ah, little satyr." The man grinned, revealing pointed fangs. "Your wish is granted. You will stay in Evora forever, because sadly for you, my figurative wolves are literally wolves." Chapter 16. Nico. "You're not Orion," Nico blurted. A stupid comment, but it was the first thing that came to his mind. The man before him clearly was not a hunter giant. He wasn't tall enough. He didn't have dragon legs. He didn't carry a bow or quiver, and he didn't have the headlamp eyes Raina had described from her dream. The grey man laughed. "Ha ha ha! Indeed not. Orion has merely employed me to assist him in his hunt. I am—" "Lycon," Raina interrupted. "The first werewolf." The man gave her a mock bow. "Raina Ramirez Arellano, praetor of Rome, one of Lupa's whelps. I am pleased you recognize me. No doubt I am the stuff of your nightmares." "The stuff of my indigestion, perhaps." From her belt pouch, Raina produced a foldable camping knife. She flicked it open, and the wolves snarled, backing away. "I never travel without a silver spoon, or never silver weapon." Lycon bared his teeth. "Would you keep a dozen wolves and their king at bay with a pocket knife? I heard you were brave, Filia Romana. I did not realize you were foolhardy." Raina's dogs crouched, ready to spring. The coach gripped his baseball bat, though for once he didn't look anxious to swing it. Nico reached for the hilt of his sword. "Don't bother," muttered Coach Hedge. "These guys are only hurt by silver or fire. I remember them from Pike's Peak. They're annoying." "And I remember you, Gleason Hedge." The werewolf's eyes glowed lava red. "My pack will be delighted to have goat meat for dinner." Hedge snorted. "Bring it on, mangy boy. The hunters of Artemis are on their way right now, just like last time. That's a temple of Diana over there, you idiot. You're on your home turf. They're on their home turf." Again the wolves snarled and widened their circle. Some glanced nervously towards the rooftops. Lycon only glared at the coach. "A nice try, but I'm afraid the temple has been misnamed. I passed through here during Roman times. It was actually dedicated to the Emperor Augustus. Typical demigod vanity. Regardless, I've been much more careful since our last encounter. If the hunters were anywhere close by, I would know." Nico tried to think of an escape plan. They were surrounded and outnumbered. Their only effective weapon was a pocket knife. The sceptre of Diocletian was gone. The Athena Parthenos was 30 feet above them at the top of the temple. And even if they could reach it, they couldn't shadow travel until they actually had shadows. The sun wouldn't set for hours. He hardly felt brave, but he stepped forward. "So, you've got us. What are you waiting for?" Lycon studied him like a new type of meat in a butcher's display case. "Nico D'Angelo, son of Hades. I've heard of you. I'm sorry I can't kill you promptly, but I promised my employer, Orion, that I would detain you until he arrives. No worries. He should be here in a few moments. Once he's done with you, I shall spill your blood and mark this place as my territory for ages to come." Nico gritted his teeth. "Demigod blood. The blood of Olympus." "Of course," Lycon said, "spilled upon the ground, especially sacred ground. Demigod blood has many uses. With the proper incantations, it can awaken monsters or even gods. It can cause new life to spring up or make a place barren for generations. Alas, your blood will not wake Gaia herself. That honour is reserved for your friends aboard the Argo too, but fear not, your death will be almost as painful as theirs." The grass started dying around Nico's feet. The marigold beds withered. Barren ground, he thought. Sacred ground. He remembered the thousands of skeletons in the Chapel of Bones. He recalled what Hades had said about this public square, where the Inquisition had burned hundreds of people alive. This was an ancient city. How many dead lay in the ground beneath his feet? "Coach," he said, "you can climb?" Hedge scoffed. "I'm half goat, of course I can climb." "Get up to the statue and secure the rigging. Make a rope ladder and drop it down for us." But the pack of wolves?" "Raina," Nico said, "you and your dogs will have to cover our retreat." The praetor nodded grimly. "Understood." Lycon howled with laughter. "Retreat to where, son of Hades? There is no escape. You cannot kill us." "Maybe not," Nico said, "but I can slow you down." He spread his hands and the ground erupted. Nico hadn't expected it to work so well. He had pulled bone fragments from the earth before. He'd animated rat skeletons and unearthed the old human skull. Nothing prepared him for the wall of bones that burst skyward. Hundreds of femurs, ribs and fibulas entangling the wolves, forming a spiky briar patch of human remains. Most of the wolves were hopelessly trapped. Some writhed and gnashed their teeth, trying to free themselves from their haphazard cages. Lycon himself was immobilized in a cocoon of rib bones, but that didn't stop him from screaming curses. "You worthless child!" he roared. "I will rip the flesh from your limbs." "Coach, go," Nico said. The satyr sprinted towards the temple. He made the top of the podium in a single leap and scrambled up the left pillar. 2 wolves broke free from the thicket of bones. Raina threw her knife and impaled one in the neck. Her dogs pounced on the other. Orum's fangs and claws slipped harmlessly off the wolf's hide, but Argentum brought the beast down. Argentum's head was still bent sideways from the fight in Pompeii. His left ruby eye was still missing, but he managed to sink his fangs into the wolf's scruff. The wolf dissolved into a puddle of shadow. Thank goodness for silver dogs, Nico thought. Raina drew her sword. She scooped a handful of silver coins from Hedge's baseball cap, grabbed duct tape from the coach's supply bag, and began taping coins around her blade. The girl was nothing if not inventive. "Go," she told Nico. "I'll cover you." The wolves struggled, causing the bone thicket to crack and crumble. Lycon freed his right arm and began smashing through his prison of rib cages. "I will flay you alive," he promised. "I will add your pelt to my cloak." Nico ran, pausing just long enough to grab Raina's silver pocket knife from the ground. He wasn't a mountain goat, but he found a set of stairs at the back of the temple and raced to the top. He reached the base of the columns and squinted up at Coach Hedge, who was precariously perched at the feet of the Athena Parthenos, unravelling ropes and knotting a ladder. "Hurry!" Nico yelled. "Oh, really?" the coach called down. "I thought we had tons of time." The last thing Nico needed was satyr's sarcasm. Down in the square, more wolves broke free of their bone restraints. Raina swatted them aside with her modified duct tape coin sword, but a handful of change wasn't going to hold back a pack of werewolves for long. Orum snarled and snapped in frustration, unable to hurt the enemy. Argentum did his best, sinking his claws into the throat of another wolf, but the silver dog was already damaged. Soon he'd be hopelessly outnumbered. Lycon freed both his arms. He started pulling his legs from their ribcage restraints. There were only a few seconds until he would be loose. Nico was out of tricks. Summoning that wall of bones had drained him. It would take all his remaining energy to shadow travel, assuming he could even find a shadow to travel into. A shadow. He looked at the silver pocket knife in his hand. An idea came to him. Possibly the stupidest, craziest idea he'd had since he thought, "Hey, I'll get Percy to swim in the River Styx. He'll love me for that." "Raina, get up here," he yelled. He slammed another wolf in the head and ran. In mid-stride, she flicked her sword, which elongated into a javelin, then used it to launch herself up like a pole vaulter. She landed next to Nico. "What's the plan?" she asked, not even out of breath. "Show off," he grumbled. A knotted rope fell from above. "Climb, you silly non-goats," Hedge yelled. "Go," Nico told her. "Once you're up there, hang on tight to the rope. Nico, do it." Her javelin shrank back into a sword. Raina sheathed it and began to climb, scaling the column despite her armour and her supplies. Down in the plaza, Aurum and Argentum were nowhere to be seen. Either they'd retreated, or they'd been destroyed. Lycon broke free of his bone cage with a triumphant howl. "You will suffer, son of Hades!" What else is new? Nico thought. He palmed the pocket knife. "Come get me, you mutt! Or do you have to stay like a good dog until your master shows up?" Lycon sprang through the air, his claws extended, his fangs bared. Nico wrapped his free hand around the rope and concentrated, a bead of sweat trickling down his neck. As the Wolf King fell on him, Nico thrust the silver knife into Lycon's chest. All around the temple, wolves howled as one. The Wolf King sank his claws into Nico's arms. His fangs stopped less than an inch from Nico's face. Nico ignored his own pain and jabbed the pocket knife to the hilt between Lycon's ribs. "Be useful, dog," he snarled. "Back to the shadows." Lycon's eyes rolled up in his head. He dissolved into a pool of inky darkness. Then, several things happened at once. The outraged pack of wolves surged forward. From a nearby rooftop, a booming voice yelled, "Stop them!" Nico heard the unmistakable sound of a large bow being drawn taut. Then he melted into a pool of Lycon's shadow, taking his friends and the Athena Parthenos with him, slipping into cold ether, with no idea where he would emerge. Chapter 17. Piper. Piper couldn't believe how hard it was to find deadly poison. All morning she and Frank had scoured the port of Pylos. Frank allowed only Piper to come with him, thinking her charm speak might be useful if they ran into his shape-shifting relatives. As it turned out, her sword was more in demand. So far they'd slain a Laestradonian ogre in the bakery, battled a giant warthog in the public square, and defeated a flock of Stymphalian birds with some well-aimed vegetables from Piper's cornucopia. She was glad for the work. It kept her from dwelling on her conversation with her mother the night before, that bleak glimpse of the future Aphrodite had made her promise not to share. Meanwhile, Piper's biggest challenge in Pylos was the ads plastered all over town for her dad's new movie. The posters were in Greek, but Piper knew what they said. Tristan MacLean is Jake Steele, signed in blood. Gods, what a horrible title. She wished her father had never taken on the Jake Steele franchise, but it had become one of his most popular roles. There he was on the poster, his shirt ripped open to reveal perfect abs. Gross, Dad. An AK-47 in each hand, a rakish smile on his chiselled face. Halfway across the world, in the smallest, most out-of-the-way town imaginable, there was her dad. It made Piper feel sad, disoriented, homesick and annoyed all at once. Life went on. So did Hollywood. While her dad pretended to save the world, Piper and her friends actually had to. In 8 more days, unless Piper could pull off the plan Aphrodite had explained, well, there wouldn't be any more movies or theatres or people. Around 1 in the afternoon, Piper finally put her charm speak to work. She spoke with an ancient Greek ghost in a laundromat, on a 1 to 10 scale for weird conversations, definitely an 11, and got directions to an ancient stronghold where the shape-shifting descendants of Periclymenus supposedly hung out. After trudging across the island in the afternoon heat, they found the cave perched halfway up a beachside cliff. Frank insisted that Piper wait for him at the bottom while he checked it out. Piper wasn't happy about that, but she stood obediently on the beach, squinting up at the cave entrance and hoping she hadn't guided Frank into a death trap. Behind her, a stretch of white sand hugged the foot of the hills. Sunbathers sprawled on blankets. Little kids splashed in the waves. The blue sea glittered invitingly. Piper wished she could surf those waters. She'd promised to teach Hazel and Annabeth someday if they ever came out of Malibu. If Malibu still existed after the 1st of August. She glanced up at the cliff's summit. The ruins of an old castle clung to the ridge. Piper wasn't sure if that was part of the shape-changer's hideout or not. Nothing moved on the parapets. The entrance of the cave sat about 70 feet down the cliff face, a circle of black in the chalky yellow rock, like the hole of a giant pencil sharpener. Nestor's Cave, the laundromat ghost had called it. Supposedly the ancient king of Pylos had stashed his treasure there in times of crisis. The ghost also claimed that Hermes had once hidden the stolen cattle of Apollo in that cave. Cows! Piper shuddered. When she was little, her dad had driven her past a meat processing plant in Chino. The smell had been enough to turn her into a vegetarian. Ever since, just the thought of cows made her ill. Her experiences with Hera, the cow queen, the Cataplebonus of Venice, and the pictures of creepy death cows in the House of Hades hadn't helped. Piper was just starting to think, Frank's been gone too long, when he appeared at the cave entrance. Next to him stood a tall grey-haired man in a white linen suit and a pale yellow tie. The older man pressed a small shiny object, like a stone or a piece of glass, into Frank's hands. He and Frank exchanged a few words. Frank nodded gravely. Then the man turned into a seagull and flew away. Frank picked his way down the trail until he reached Piper. "I found them," he said. "I noticed. You okay?" He stared at the seagull as it flew towards the horizon. Frank's close-cropped hair pointed forward like an arrow, making his gaze even more intense. His Roman badges, mural crown, centurion, praetor, glittered on his shirt collar. On his forearm, the SPQR tattoo with the crossed spears of Mars stood out darkly in the full sunlight. He looked good in his new outfit. The giant warthog had slimed his old clothes pretty badly, so Piper had taken him for some emergency shopping in Pylos. Now he wore new black jeans, soft leather boots and dark green Henley shirt that fitted him snugly. He'd been self-conscious about the shirt. He was used to hiding his bulk in baggy clothes, but Piper assured him he didn't have to worry about that anymore. Since his growth spurt in Venice, he'd grown into his bulkiness just fine. "You haven't changed, Frank," she'd told him. "You're just more you." It was a good thing Frank Zhang was still so sweet and soft-spoken. Otherwise, he would have been a scary guy. "Frank," she prompted gently. "Yeah, sorry." He focused on her. My cousins, I guess you'd call them. They've been living here for generations, all descended from Periclymenus, the Argonaut. I told them my story, how the Zhang family had gone from Greece to Rome, to China, to Canada. I told them about the legionnaire ghost I saw in the House of Hades, urging me to come to Pylos. They didn't seem surprised. They said it's happened before, long-lost relatives coming home. Piper heard the wistfulness in his voice. "You were expecting something different?" He shrugged. "A bigger welcome, some party balloons, I'm not sure. My grandmother told me I would close the circle, bring our family honour and all that. But my cousins here, they acted kind of cold and distant, like they didn't want me around. I don't think they liked that I'm a son of Mars. Honestly, I don't think they liked that I'm Chinese either." Piper glared into the sky. The seagull was long gone, which was probably a good thing. She would have been tempted to shoot it out of the air with a glazed ham. "If your cousins feel that way, they're idiots. They don't know how great you are." Frank shuffled from foot to foot. "They got a little more friendly when I told them I was just passing through. They gave me a going-away present." He opened his hand. In his palm gleamed a metallic vial, no bigger than an eyedropper. Piper resisted the urge to step away. "Is that the poison?" Frank nodded. "They call it Pilosian mint. Apparently the plant sprang from the blood of a nymph who died on a mountain near here, back in ancient times. I didn't ask for details." The vial was so tiny, Piper worried there wouldn't be enough. Normally she didn't wish for more deadly poison, nor was she sure how it would help them make the so-called physician's cure that Nike had mentioned. But if the cure could really cheat death, Piper wanted to brew a 6-pack, 1 dose for each of her friends. Frank rolled the vial around in his palm. "I wish Vitellius Reticulus were here." Piper wasn't sure she'd heard him right. Ridiculous who? A smile flickered across his mouth. "Gaius Vitellius Reticulus, although we did call him ridiculous sometimes. He was one of the lairs of the 5th cohort, kind of a goofball, but he was the son of Aesculapius, the healing god. If anybody knew about the physician's cure, he might." "A healing god would be nice," Piper mused. "Better than having a screaming tied-up victory goddess on board. Hey, you're lucky. My cabin is closest to the stables. I can hear her yelling all night. First place or death, and A- is a failing grade. Leo really needs to design a gag that's better than my old sock." Piper shuddered. She still didn't understand why it had been a good idea to take the goddess captive. The sooner they got rid of Nike, the better. "So, your cousins, did they have any advice about what comes next? This chained god we're supposed to find in Sparta?" Frank's expression darkened. "Yeah, I'm afraid they had some thoughts on that. Let's get back to the ship and I'll tell you about it." Piper's feet were killing her. She wondered if she could convince Frank to turn into a giant eagle and carry her, but before she could ask, she heard footsteps in the sand behind them. "Hello, nice tourists." A scraggly fisherman with a white captain's hat and a mouthful of gold teeth beamed at them. "Boat ride? Very cheap." He gestured to the shore, where a skiff with an outboard motor waited. Piper returned his smile. She loved it when she could communicate with the locals. "Yes, please," she said in her best charm speak. "And we'd like you to take us somewhere special." The boat captain dropped them at the Argo 2, anchored a 1/4 mile out to sea. Piper pressed a wad of euros into the captain's hands. She wasn't above using charm speak on mortals, but she decided to be as fair and careful as possible. Her days of stealing BMWs from car dealerships were over. "Thank you," she told him. "If anyone asks, you took us around the island and showed us the sights. You dropped us at the docks in Pylos. You never saw any giant warship." "No warship," the captain agreed. "Thank you, nice American tourists." They climbed aboard the Argo 2, and Frank smiled at her awkwardly. "Well, nice killing giant warthogs with you." Piper laughed. "You too, Mr. Zhang." She gave him a hug, which seemed to fluster him, but Piper couldn't help liking Frank. Not only was he a kind and considerate boyfriend to Hazel, but whenever Piper saw him wearing Jason's old Praetor's badge, she felt grateful to him for stepping up and accepting that job. He had taken a huge responsibility off Jason's shoulders and left him free. Piper hoped to pursue a new path at Camp Half-Blood, assuming, of course, that they all lived through the next 8 days. The crew gathered for a hurried meeting on the foredeck, mostly because Percy was keeping an eye on a giant red sea serpent swimming off the port side. "That thing is really red," Percy muttered. "I wonder if it's cherry-flavoured." "Why don't you swim over and find out?" Annabeth asked. "How about no?" "Anyway," Frank said, "according to my Pylos cousins, the chained god we're looking for in Sparta is my dad. Ares, not Mars. Apparently the Spartans kept a statue of him chained up in their city, so the spirit of war would never leave them." "Okay," Leo said. "The Spartans were freaks. Of course we've got Victory tied up downstairs, so I guess we can't talk." Jason leaned against the forward ballista. "On to Sparta then. But how does a chained god's heartbeat help us to find a cure for dying?" From the tightness in his face, Piper could tell he was still in pain. She remembered what Aphrodite had told her. "It's not just his sword wound, my dear. It's the ugly truth he saw in Ithaca. If the poor boy doesn't stay strong, That truth will eat right through him. Piper? Hazel asked. She stirred. Sorry, what? I was asking you about the visions, Hazel prompted. You told me you'd seen some stuff in your dagger blade. Right. Piper reluctantly unsheathed Catoptris. Ever since she'd used it to stab the snow goddess Chione, the visions in the blade had become colder and harsher, like images etched in ice. She'd seen eagles swirling over Camp Half-Blood, a wave of earth destroying New York. She'd seen scenes from the past, her father beaten and bound at the top of Mount Diablo, Jason and Percy fighting giants in the Roman Colosseum, the river god, Aeschylus, reaching out to her, pleading for the cornucopia she'd cut from his head. She tried to clear her thoughts. I don't see anything right now, but one vision kept popping up. Annabeth and I are exploring some ruins. Ruins? Leo rubbed his hands. Now we're talking. How many ruins can there be in Greece? Quiet, Leo, Annabeth scolded. Piper, do you think it was Sparta? Maybe, Piper said. Anyway, suddenly we're in this dark place like a cave. We're staring at this bronze warrior statue. In the vision, I touch the statue's face and the flames start swirling around us. That's all I saw. Flames, Frank scowled. I don't like that vision. Me neither. Percy kept one eye on the red sea serpent, which was still slithering through the waves about 100 yards to port. If the statue engulfs people in fire, we should send Leo. I love you too, man. You know what I mean? You're immune. Or heck, give me some of those nice water grenades and I'll go. Ares and I have tangled before. Annabeth stared at the coastline of Pylos, now retreating in the distance. If Piper saw the two of us going after the statue, then that's who should go. We'll be all right. There's always a way to survive. Not always, Hazel warned. Since she was the only one in the group who had actually died and come back to life, her observation sort of killed the mood. Frank held out the vial of Pylosian mint. What about this stuff? After the House of Hades, I kind of hoped we were done drinking poison. Store it securely in the hold, Annabeth said. For now, that's all we can do. Once we figure out this chained god situation, we'll head to the island of Delos. The Curse of Delos, Hazel remembered. That sounds fun. Hopefully Apollo will be there, Annabeth said. Delos was his home island. He's the god of medicine. He should be able to advise us. Aphrodite's words came back to Piper. You must bridge the gap between Roman and Greek, my child. Neither storm nor fire can succeed without you. Aphrodite had warned her of what was to come, told her what Piper would have to do to stop Gaia. Whether or not she would have the courage, Piper didn't know. Off the port bow, the cherry-flavoured sea serpent spewed steam. Yeah, it's definitely checking us out, Percy decided. Maybe we should take to the air for a while. Airborne it is, Leo said. Festus, do the honours. The bronze dragon figurehead creaked and clacked. The ship's engine hummed. The oars lifted, expanding into aerial blades of a sound like 90 umbrellas opening at once. And the Argo, too, rose into the sky. We should reach Sparta by morning, Leo announced. And remember to come by the mess hall tonight, folks, because Chef Leo is making his famous 3-alarm tofu tacos. Chapter 18. Piper. Piper didn't want to get yelled at by a three-legged table. When Jason visited her cabin that evening, she made sure to keep the door open because Buford the Wonder Table took his duties as acting chaperone very seriously. If he had the slightest suspicion a girl and a boy were in the same cabin without supervision, he would steam and clatter down the hall, his holographic projection of Coach Head yelling, "Cut that out! Give me 20 push-ups! Put some clothes on!" Jason sat at the foot of her bunk. "I was about to go on duty. Just wanted to check on you first." Piper nudged his leg with her foot. "The guy who got run through with a sword wants to check on me? How are you feeling?" He gave her a lopsided smile. His face was so tanned from their time on the coast of Africa that the scar on his lip looked like a chalk mark. His blue eyes were even more startling. His hair had grown out corn silk white, though he still had a groove along his scalp where he'd been grazed by a bullet from the bandit Skyron's flintlock. If such a minor scrape from celestial bronze took so long to heal, Piper wondered how he'd ever get over the imperial gold wound in his gut. "I've been worse," Jason assured her. "Once, in Oregon, this Dracana cut off my arms." Piper blinked. Then she slapped his arm gently. "Shut up. I had you for a second." They held hands in a comfortable silence. For a moment, Piper could almost imagine they were normal teenagers, enjoying each other's company and learning to be together as a couple. Sure, Jason and she had had a few months at Camp Half-Blood, but the war with Gaia had always been looming. Piper wondered what it would be like if they didn't have to worry about dying a dozen times every day. "I never thanked you," Jason's expression turned serious. Back on Ithaca, after I saw my mum's remnant, her mania, when I was wounded, you kept me from slipping away, Pipes. Part of me, his voice faltered. Part of me wanted to close my eyes and stop fighting. Piper's heart did a slow twist. She felt her own pulse in her fingers. Jason, you're a fighter. You'd never give up. When you faced your mother's spirit, that was you being strong, not me. Maybe. His voice was dry. I didn't mean to lay something so heavy on you, Pipes. It's just, I have my mum's DNA. The human part of me is all her. What if I make the wrong choices? What if I make a mistake I can't take back? When we're fighting Gaia, I don't want to end up like my mum, reduced to a mania, chewing on my regrets forever. Piper cupped her hands around his. She felt like she was back on the deck of the Argo 2, holding the Boread's ice grenade just before it detonated. You'll make the right choices, she said. I don't know what will happen to any of us, but you could never end up like your mum. How can you be so sure? Piper studied the tattoo on his forearm. SPQR, the Eagle of Jupiter, 12 lines for his years in the Legion. My dad used to tell me this story about making choices. She shook her head. No, never mind. I'll sound like Grandpa Tom. Go on, Jason said. What's the story? Well, these two Cherokee hunters were out in the woods, right? Each of them was under a taboo. A taboo? Something they weren't allowed to do? Yeah. Piper began to relax. She wondered if this was why her dad and granddad always liked telling stories. You could make even the most terrifying topic easier to talk about by framing it in something that happened to a couple of Cherokee hunters hundreds of years ago. Take a problem, turn it into entertainment. Perhaps that's why her dad had become an actor. So, one of the hunters, she continued, he wasn't supposed to eat deer meat. The other guy wasn't supposed to eat squirrel meat. Why? Hey, I don't know. Some Cherokee taboos were permanent no-nos, like killing eagles. She tapped the symbol on Jason's arm. That was bad luck for almost everybody. But sometimes individual Cherokee took on temporary taboos, maybe to cleanse their spirit or because they knew from listening to the spirit world or whatever that the taboo was important. They went with their instincts. Okay, Jason sounded unsure. So back to these two hunters. They were out hunting in the woods all day. The only thing they caught were squirrels. At night they made camp, and the guy who could eat squirrel, well, he started cooking meat over the fire. Yum! Another reason I'm a vegetarian. Anyway, the second hunter, who wasn't allowed squirrel meat, he was starving. He just sat there clutching his stomach while his friend ate. Finally, the first hunter started feeling guilty. Go ahead, he said. Eat some. But the second hunter resisted. It's taboo for me. I'll get in serious trouble. I'll probably turn into a snake or something. The first hunter laughed. Where did you get that crazy idea? Nothing will happen to you. You can go back to avoiding squirrel meat tomorrow. The second hunter knew he shouldn't, but he ate. Jason traced his finger across her knuckles, which made it hard to concentrate. What happened? In the middle of the night, the second hunter woke up screaming in pain. The first hunter ran over to see what was wrong. He threw off his friend's covers and saw that his friend's legs had fused together in a leathery tail. As he watched, snakeskin crept up his friend's body. The poor hunter wept and apologized to the spirits and cried in fear, but there was nothing to be done. The first hunter stayed by his side and tried to comfort him until the unfortunate guy fully transformed into a giant snake and slithered away. The end. I love these Cherokee stories, Jason said. They're so cheerful. Yeah, well. So the guy turned into a snake. The moral is, Frank has been eating squirrels? She laughed, which felt good. No, stupid. The point is, trust your instincts. Squirrel meat might be just fine for one person, but taboo for another. The second hunter knew he had a serpent spirit inside him, waiting to take over. He knew he shouldn't feed that bad spirit by eating squirrel meat, but he did it anyway. So, I shouldn't eat squirrels. Piper was relieved to see the gleam in his eyes. She thought about something Hazel had confided to her a few nights ago. I think Jason is the linchpin to Hera's whole scheme. He was her first play. He's going to be her last. My point, Piper said, poking his chest, is that you, Jason Grace, are very familiar with your own bad spirits, and you try your best not to feed them. You have solid instincts, and you know how to follow them. Whatever annoying qualities you have, you are a genuinely good person who always tries to make the right choice. So no more talk about giving up. Jason frowned. Wait, I have annoying qualities? She rolled her eyes. Come here. She was about to kiss him when there was a knock on the door. Leo leaned inside. A party? Am I invited? Jason cleared his throat. Hey, Leo, what's going on? Oh, not much. He pointed upstairs. The usual obnoxious Venti trying to destroy the ship. You ready for guard duty? Yeah. Jason leaned forward and kissed Piper. Thanks. And don't worry, I'm good. That, she told him, was kind of my point. After the boys left, Piper lay on her Pegasus down pillows and watched the constellations, her lamp projected on the ceiling. She didn't think she could sleep, but a full day of fighting monsters in the summer heat had taken its toll. At last, she closed her eyes and drifted into a nightmare. The Acropolis. Piper had never been there, but she recognised it from pictures. An ancient stronghold perched on a hill, almost as impressive as Gibraltar. Rising 400 feet over the nighttime sprawl of modern Athens, the sheer cliffs were topped with a crown of limestone walls. On the cliff top, a collection of ruined temples and modern cranes gleamed silver in the moonlight. In her dream, Piper flew above the Parthenon, the ancient temple of Athena, the left side of its hollow shell encased in metal scaffolding. The Acropolis seemed devoid of mortals, perhaps because of the financial problems in Greece, or perhaps Gaia's forces had arranged some pretext to keep the tourists and construction workers away. Piper's view zoomed to the centre of the temple. So many giants had gathered there, it looked like a cocktail party for redwood trees. A few Piper recognised, those horrible twins from Rome, Otis and Ephialtes, dressed in matching construction worker outfits. Polybatus, looking just as Percy had described him, with poison dripping from his dreadlocks and a breastplate sculpted to resemble hungry mouths. Worst of all, Enceladus, the giant who had kidnapped Piper's dad. His armour was etched with flame designs, his hair braided with bones, his flagpole-sized spear burned with purple fire. Piper had heard that each giant was born to oppose a particular god, but there were way more than 12 giants gathered in the Parthenon. She counted at least 20, and if that wasn't intimidating enough, around the giant's feet milled a horde of smaller monsters, cyclopses, ogres, six-armed earthborn, and serpent-legged draconi. In the centre of the crowd stood an empty, makeshift throne of twisted scaffolding and stone blocks apparently yanked at random from the ruins. As Piper watched, a new giant lumbered up the steps at the far end of the Acropolis. He wore a massive velour tracksuit with gold chains around his neck and greased black hair. So, he looked like a 30-foot-tall mobster, if mobsters had dragon feet and burnt orange skin. The Mafia giant ran towards the Parthenon and stumbled inside, flattening several earthborn under his feet. He stopped, gasping for breath, at the foot of the throne. "Where is Porphyrion?" he demanded. "I have news." Piper's old enemy, Enceladus, stepped forward. "Tardy as usual, Hippolytus. I hope your news is worth the wait. King Porphyrion should be—" The ground between them split. An even larger giant leapt from the earth like a breaching whale. "King Porphyrion is here," announced the king. He looked just as Piper remembered from the Wolf House in Sonoma. 40 feet tall, he towered over his brethren. In fact, Piper realised queasily he was the same size as the Athena Parthenos that had once dominated the temple. In his seaweed-coloured braids, captured demigod weapons glittered. His face was cruel and pale green, his eyes as white as the mist. His body radiated its own sort of gravity, causing the other monsters to lean towards him. Soil and pebbles skittered across the ground, pulled towards his massive dragon feet. The mobster giant, Hippolytus, kneeled. "My king, I bring word of the enemy." Porphyrion took his throne. "Speak." "The demigod ship sails around the Peloponnese. Already they have destroyed the ghosts of Ithaca and captured the goddess Nike in Olympia." The crowd of monsters stirred uneasily. A cyclops chewed his fingernails. 2 draconi exchanged coins like they were taking bets for the end of the world office sweepstake. Porphyrion just laughed. "Hippolytus, do you wish to kill your enemy Hermes and become the messenger of the giants?" "Yes, my king." "Then you will have to bring fresher news. I know all this already. None of it matters. The demigods have taken the route we expected them to take. They would have been fools to go any other way." "But, sire, they will arrive at Sparta by morning if they manage to unleash the Macae." "Idiot!" Porphyrion's voice shook the ruins. "Our brother, Mimas, awaits them at Sparta. You need not worry. Their demigods cannot change their fate. One way or another their blood shall be spilled upon these stones and wake the earth mother." The crowd roared approval and brandished their weapons. Hippolytus bowed and retreated, but another giant approached the throne. With a start, Piper realised this one was female. Not that it was easy to tell. The giantess had the same dragon-like legs and the same long braided hair. She was just as tall and burly as the males, but her breastplate was definitely fashioned for a woman. Her voice was higher and reedier. "Father," she cried, "I ask again, why here in this place? Why not on the slopes of Mount Olympus itself? Surely—" "Peraboia, The king growled, "The matter is settled. The original Mount Olympus is now a barren peak. It offers us no glory. Here in the centre of the Greek world, the roots of the gods truly run deep. There may be older temples, but this Parthenon holds their memory best. In the minds of mortals, it is the most powerful symbol of the Olympians. When the blood of the last heroes is spilled here, the Acropolis shall be razed. This hill shall crumble, and the entire city shall be consumed by the Earth Mother. We will be the masters of creation." The crowd hollered and howled, but the giantess, Periboia, didn't look convinced. "You tempt fate, father," she said. "The demigods have friends here as well as enemies. It is not wise." "Wise!" Porphyrion rose from his throne. All the giants took a step back. "Enceladus, my counsellor, explain to my daughter what wisdom is." The fiery giant came forward. His eyes glowed like diamonds. Piper loathed his face. She'd seen it too many times in her dreams when her father was held captive. "You need not worry, princess," Enceladus said. "We have taken Delphi. Apollo was driven out of Olympus in shame. The future is closed to the gods. They stumble forward blindly. As for tempting fate," he gestured to his left, and a smaller giant shuffled forward. He had ratty grey hair, a wrinkled face, and eyes that were milky with cataracts. Instead of armour, he wore a tattered sackcloth tunic. His dragon-scale legs were as white as frost. He didn't look like much, but Piper noticed that the other monsters kept their distance. Even Porphyrion leaned away from the old giant. "This is Tun," Enceladus said. "Just as many of us were born to kill certain gods, Tun was born to kill the three fates. He will strangle the old ladies with his bare hands. He will shred their yarn and destroy their loom. He will destroy fate itself." King Porphyrion rose and spread his arms in triumph. "No more prophecies, my friends. No more futures foretold. The time of Gaia shall be our era, and we will make our own destiny." The crowd cheered so loudly that Piper felt as if she were crumbling to pieces. Then she realised someone was shaking her awake. "Hey," Annabeth said, "we made it to Sparta. Can you get ready?" Piper sat up groggily, her heart still pounding. "Yeah." She gripped Annabeth's arm. "But first, there's something you need to hear."